Really delighted to have Mark Suzman here for a conversation about what I think is one of the most timely issues. It's something that we talk about in the global development community at length, but it's kind of become a popular issue, something that we see in the mainstream press, and that is really the future of philanthropy. What is the influence of philanthropy in public life, on the big issues of the day, on the issues that really touch the lives of millions of people around the world, and where is it heading? And I can't think of somebody better to speak to about this than you, Mark, given your role as Chief Strategy Officer and President of the Gates Foundation, the world's largest private foundation, and your many years thinking about these issues and working on these issues every day. So thanks for taking some time to have this discussion.
Oh, great. Really happy to join you and happy to be with you.
I wonder if we could just tell us a little bit about yourself. For those of us who are in the development community, some of us have the chance to know you personally, but what does it mean to be a Chief Strategy Officer at the Gates Foundation, and how did you find yourself in that role? What kind of career path led you to doing this work?
Yeah, well, maybe if I do the career path first, because it's definitely something I reflect on. And if you had asked me 30 years ago, describe some scenarios where your future might take you 30 years from now, be as bold as you might be, I would never have come up with you will be sitting at a world's largest philanthropy on the corner of the Pacific Ocean dealing with global health and development issues. At the time, I was a young journalist working in South Africa at the time of right towards the end of the anti-apartheid struggle and the rise of Nelson Mandela to power. And my career progression essentially was I worked as a journalist right through the late 90s, early 2000s, working for the Financial Times in South Africa, covering the end of apartheid, then in the UK, covering sort of social welfare and related issues across Europe, and then in the United States, covering politics, trade, globalization out of Washington, D.C., and then shifted to work for what was supposed to be a temporary one-year leave of absence at the United Nations in 2000. And that year was the year the world launched the Millennium Development Goals. And suddenly I was part of a big effort to drive energy around development. And I kind of stayed there for 6 years, working under Kofi Annan's administration when he was Secretary General. And in 2006, when he stepped down, was kind of like, oh, well, what do I do now? Am I a lapsed journalist? Am I a UN bureaucrat? Am I something different? And that was just at the time Warren Buffett had announced that he would give the bulk of his fortune to the Gates Foundation, and they were launching a global development program going beyond health. And they reached out to me and asked if I wanted to come in and try and set up the policy and advocacy program for that new group, which I did, somewhat to my own and my wife's surprise. And 12 years later, here I still am. And 3 years ago, I took on the additional post of Chief Strategy Officer. We'd never had one of those before. But what that really was intended to do is saying, because we work in so many areas that are effectively siloed but deal with very common problems. We have an HIV program or a K-12 program in education in the U.S. or an agricultural development program, and it's got their own experts and their own groups, but we want to actually have common ways of how you think about the value of research and development investments in each sector, how you think about partnership building or scale and dissemination, how you think about metrics and results. And so as Chief Strategy Officer, my main responsibility there is how do we think and maximize impact? In the end, philanthropy is all about allocating scarce resources, primarily dollars, but also voice, convening power, and other tools to their most impactful outcomes. And so that's what I try to help the foundation do every day.
And I want to get into that in a moment a little bit more deeply, but I'm just curious because even listening to that brief kind of introduction of your role, it's clear that you share a trait very common at the Gates Foundation, which is optimism. You can see this in your Twitter feed, in your speaking and writing, and really everybody at the foundation seems to exhibit it. And it is increasingly a rare trait in an era of populism and climate change. And you look at the headlines, it's hard not to be depressed and to feel like the world is spiraling in the wrong direction. And yet you seem motivated in a different direction. And I wonder about that. Just can you give us a word or two about what is your motivation in this work? What is it that gets you to get up in the morning and do an interview like this early during the holiday period of the summer? And what is it that makes you kind of continue to look for those next opportunities to partner, to innovate, as do so many others at the Gates Foundation?
Absolutely. And actually, the answer to that is the same answer that led to my very unexpected career transition from journalism into sort of UN and global development. And that is that we're data-driven. I'm pretty data-driven, even if you get driven by sort of personal interactions as well. And it became very clear to me at that period in 2000, when we launched the Millennium Development Goals, that this was a moment that the world really was on a trajectory of getting better. And, the 90s were actually a pretty awful decade for a lot of the developing world outside of China and a few other parts of Asia. For Latin America, for Africa, for large parts of, East and Central Europe, there was actually a sort of net decline in poverty and many social indicators. But in the early 2000s, you felt that there was some momentum and energy around these very, at the time, sort of seen as unachievable aspirations of, could you reduce child mortality by 2/3 by 2015? Could you halve global poverty, which nobody believed we could do, and actually we ended up meeting 3 years early. And so being part of that momentum made you realize, actually, the world is getting better. In fact, this is a period we're still in where more people are getting given more opportunities, are being lifted out of poverty, are surviving when they otherwise would have died of preventable causes than any other time in human history. But nearly nobody understands that. When we do global polling, barely 1% of the global population believe that improvements at that pace are happening. The vast majority actually think the world is getting worse, which is exacerbated by all the news stories you talk about. And so a big part of what motivates me is we know the results are there. We know this is achievable. It's actually happening, but that momentum is all at risk if people don't believe it's happening and withdraw support or don't provide support for the kind of interventions that we need to take it to the next level. So that's my key measure. So I'm definitely optimistic, and that's why I get up early, because I try to make others optimistic too, because we have good reason.
In that answer, you talked about the we, right? Like where we are going as a world community. And back when you started this work in 2000, that we might have included some element of private philanthropy, but it was pretty small compared to the rest of the institutions we're talking about, UN agencies and multilateral banks. That is really starting to change. And obviously the Gates Foundation is at the forefront of it. But as many books recently, including my own, have argued, there's kind of a tidal wave of private philanthropy that is getting to the scale of government in some cases, and maybe down the road could even rival it in terms of some of the issues that we work on, like global health. And I wonder what you think about that new kind of we when you think of the international system. And what does it mean to have private philanthropy at this kind of scale and have this kind of influence in the world today? How do you see that from your perch at the Gates Foundation?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's an interesting coincidence of timing. It genuinely is a coincidence that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was formed the year the Millennium Development Goals were launched in 2000. But at the time, I don't think it crossed Bill and Melinda's mind that they might be working extensively with the UN or thinking about these global goals. Their vision was really about creating big public goods, mostly in the research and development space, that somehow the world or the system would take care of delivering to those who most needed them. And part of our evolution as a philanthropy and against our primary goal, and our goal as the Gates Foundation is a very simple one that you've seen as you come in to our building. It's the view that every person deserves the chance to a healthy and productive life, and every life has equal value. And we pick a couple of key sectors and areas where we think we can maximize that aspiration. So that's in areas like health and global development, in areas like agriculture or financial inclusion. And so in answer to your question about the role of philanthropy relative to sort of UN agencies or governments, we don't believe we can ever actually come in and substitute for government or big multilateral agencies, or indeed the private sector when the private sector can play a role. We're large and growing, and at the Gates Foundation, we're the world's largest philanthropy. But in relative scale, we're still tiny compared to the resources that governments can provide. Even international development assistance is many multiples of what we're able to do. And then when you put it into things like domestic funding here in the US around education or other areas we work on. So the role of philanthropy has grown. We think that's a net good thing, but we need to be really thoughtful about what is it philanthropy does well. How can philanthropy be complementary to these other forces and sort of drive and catalyze action that otherwise might not have happened?
I think that raises multiple threads, but I want to just first press you on the numbers in that, yes, private philanthropy is small compared to government resources, but it does kind of depend on the context, right? So if you look at, for example, global health spending, and you look at the size of what the Gates Foundation does today, and then you think of other private foundations like the Bloomberg Philanthropies and others that are coming up, isn't it likely that the private side of this could be very, very significant, not just a rounding error, but maybe one of the biggest players in critical areas like that going forward? Or do you still think it's likely to be just a small percentage of global funding?
Well, it depends how you measure, all right? So if you look at the global health sector, even just global health spending in developing countries on primary healthcare, no, we will remain tiny. Even the very poorest countries are able to fund much more than we're able to do in any combination with other philanthropies. But then if you look at specific targeted programs, that can change. For example, it is true that the Gates Foundation is now the world's largest funder of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative. So that's a partnership we have with the World Health Organization, with UNICEF, with Rotary, to really eliminate polio, to make polio the second disease after smallpox that we wipe from the face of the planet. And we're very, very close. We're down to a few dozen cases, really, mostly in Pakistan and Afghanistan. We hope we'll be able to declare Africa polio-free by the end of this year. And that does bring in a lot of governmental and other funding, but it's also one of those ones that's challenging for governments, traditional rich country and other governments, to justify, because you have so few cases and you're spending basically almost millions of dollars per case, because as long as there are any cases, you have to vaccinate every child on the planet. And we're close to that last mile. And this is an area where, to be honest, our preference would be that governments fund this. We see it as a kind of gap. It is a great public good. To eradicate a disease will actually save enormous amounts of money for everybody going forward when you don't have to do these millions and millions of vaccinations every year. But we realize that's challenging. And so we are able to come in and help fill that gap. And, we hope it doesn't become sort of exclusive. We cannot do that on our own. We need that full range of partners. But that would be true as we look in other specific areas. We're also the largest funders of research into a global malaria vaccine. We wish there was more private sector and public sector funding going into that, because malaria still kills many millions of people around the world and makes hundreds of millions ill every year. And so we think that would be a net public good, but we can come in a very targeted way and help leverage and provide a market that actually catalyzes big private sector pharmaceutical company research into it, that brings together some governments around intervention. So in targeted areas, yes. But hopefully, again, we're very carefully selected to maximize the impact.
And I think those are great examples, and they do make sense. But on the one hand, you're saying, and I know the foundation works on this, your role particularly, getting government, getting private sector, getting international institutions aligned on opportunities to really save lives around the world to have the most impact. But another part of what you work on is getting more and more private philanthropy to come and be brought to bear against these very issues. And I wonder how you think about that, right? We're in an era of extreme income inequality, and that may be very much driving the kind of pessimism we talked about just a moment ago. Even as things are improving for some of the poorest people in the world, for a lot of middle-class people and a lot of middle-income countries or countries that are more advanced economically, there's a lot of turmoil related to inequality. We see it every day. And I wonder, how do you think about this kind of bubble of extreme wealth at the top, this 9 trillion or so in assets held by the folks who are billionaires in the world? I think some over 2,000 people in the world now are classified as billionaires. How do you think about what they ought to do? You meet with some of these people and you talk to them about their philanthropy. Presumably your argument is you ought to give it away, as Bill and Melinda have decided to do. How does that fit into the worldview that you're you're describing here, where government plays a key role and international institutions do and private sector. This is a potentially outsized role that private philanthropy could begin to play over time, no?
Yeah, well, let me take that in two parts. First, looking at the issue of inequality, and then looking at the issue of what the world's very wealthiest people could or should be doing in the space. When it comes to inequality, we completely agree that growing global inequality is one of the biggest challenges. And as the world tries to move forward to meet the successors to those Millennium Development Goals, I talked about the Sustainable Development Goals, which have a deadline of 2030 and were agreed by all members of the United Nations in 2015, and are bigger and more ambitious and cover a range of issues from the environment to gender empowerment, as well as the core poverty and health and education goals. That is a big challenge. And in fact, at the Foundation, we have a big annual event we host at the United Nations General Assembly, which we'll do this September, called Goalkeepers. And every year, Bill and Melinda put out a report about issues where they see both challenge and opportunity. And this year's report is going to be focused on global inequality. And it's going to use some new data. I want to tantalize you all, so please tune in closer to the time in September. But we've got some very cool data that actually looks at big bits of inequality that at the global level, between rich and poor countries, at the regional level, so within countries, you get these massive gaps. And then actually at the household level, so at the gender level, between men and women in a household, between children, boy children and girl children. And to use a bit of data that actually is not from the report, it's from a recent trip I did to Nigeria just last month, you can have a 10 times higher likelihood of dying in childbirth in some of the tougher northern states in Nigeria than in some of the better performing southern states. That's a 10x difference in one geography. That kind of inequality has very little to do with resources and wealth. And it's about having the right kind of sort of facilities and structure and training and environment. So, I want to put that to one side, but I think that when we talk about inequality, think about inequalities in terms of outcomes and opportunities for the very poorest. Those are things we can tackle and we should be working on, regardless of the big, pure wealth gaps. Then when it comes to the growing pools of private wealth you're talking about, absolutely. Bill, Melinda, and Warren Buffett, who also, as I mentioned, provides the bulk of his fortune to the Gates Foundation, together launched the Giving Pledge now nearly 10 years ago, essentially to say, we believe those of us who've been incredibly fortunate to become owners of very large pools of private wealth should find ways to give back to society. And we believe strongly in philanthropy. And the Giving Pledge has this commitment that you should give away at least 50% of your wealth, and you need to be a billionaire to be eligible in dollar terms. And then they also personally said, it's not a requirement of the Giving Pledge, but it's a sort of aspiration they have and urge on their fellow billionaires, is we think you should give now. Don't wait. You can wait, but our preference, they give now. And we would like you to give big. We'd like you to give as much as possible because we think that makes sense. And we personally believe that giving to inequity or giving to address inequity and inequality is the highest impact thing. And so that's what we invest in. But again, giving is a very personal choice for those who like to do other things in arts or culture or medical research or to universities. That's fine. But they definitely do lay out a sense of, here's where we think the greatest impact could be.
And I wonder how you look at when they talk to you and say, look, Bill and Melinda have given more than anyone, I think probably in human history that we can identify, right? Some 50 billion. And yet their wealth has gone up during this period. And partly maybe some of the forces you just described around inequality where return to assets are so high in this moment. And I believe Bill and Melinda's net worth is now higher than when they started the foundation and began giving it away. Bill, I think, has said in the past, it's hard to give it away as fast as he would want to. And so what about the argument you make to those other billionaires who might say, well, it seems hard even for you to give this away. Why don't you give it away faster yourself? And you look at some of the others who are there. Bloomberg Philanthropies is now one of the largest, I think, 800 million or so a year in giving. And yet he is also signed the Giving Pledge and would need to give much more to be on track given his level of wealth. Are the opportunities there today for people to just give and give now, as you suggested, and given these kinds of large amounts, do we know what to give to where we really get the return on investment that you can convince the new class of donors?
Yeah. So again, two answers to it. First, just in terms of what we do and Bill, Melinda, and Warren's status is, we have actually, if you track us, significantly increased our spending year on year in the last few years. So in the most recent kind of year, last year, we gave over $5 billion. And that's been steadily tracking up if you follow things. And every grant we make is publicly available on our website. And we are likely to continue to see some sort of steady increases over the years to come. But in all of those, we have, and this is the other thing I oversee as Chief Strategy Officer, is we have to have clear approved strategies which are looking at the highest return on investment, that have clear metrics and accountability, that are looking at, are we maximizing the way we leverage and work with other partners. And we've developed a model. It takes some time, but we think we can do that effectively and do it effectively. And in terms of the overall growing wealth that Bill and Melinda and indeed Warren have had, both of them, all three of them, are committed that they will give away 99% of their wealth. And it will be given, in the case of Warren, within 10 years of his death, his entire fortune will be spent. And with Bill and Melinda, actually Bill, Melinda, and Warren, whoever the last of the three of them to die is, we will spend down the foundation and all their residual assets within 20 years of their death. And that's because they want to be sure that we are giving now at scale in sustainable ways. And so, every time you see them getting wealthier, don't worry, that money is all going to come, and in the not too distant future, to hopefully high impact philanthropic initiatives. To the second question of are there enough high impact initiatives out there that can take in resources, we believe the answer is emphatically yes. Again, you may need to take time to develop interesting kinds of partnerships and ways to do it at scale. It's interesting watching very wealthy people because it's challenging for people to give money away, even psychologically, of bits that might be relatively small parts of their net wealth. And so we've been experimenting recently with, are there some pooled funding ideas? We support a group called Co-Impact, which works with a number of philanthropists and the Rockefeller Foundation in terms of trying to pool a bunch of philanthropic resources and leverage them into, half a dozen very high impact at scale opportunities. There's a similar initiative in the United States that's significantly larger about investing called the Blue Meridian Initiative. There's the Audacious Ideas that Ted and Richard Branson have been doing, which tries to pool money. So I think there are interesting efforts underway that try to pull together very wealthy people against high-impact investments that can be done at larger scale. And we hope and believe that is a sector that will continue to grow very rapidly in the years to come.
Yeah, on the one hand, you have what I think for me and what I document in my book are pretty exciting initiatives like the ones you just mentioned. And you've got kind of like-minded philanthropists who are donating against some of the biggest health and education and agriculture challenges in the world. But on the other hand, you've got people who might have a different worldview. They might have the same kind of level of resources, but they have a very different worldview. They might be, fighting against some of the very issues that you and the foundation are fighting for. And I wonder how you see that playing out. There are a couple of different criticisms out there as this debate around private philanthropy is starting to grow in the public consciousness. And I think this is an important one of them, which is, well, what do you say to those who might not share the same worldview, who might have very different views on climate or on immigration, or, on, you name it, really, very different views and could use their outsized wealth to fund the same kind of influence and advocacy that you're using for what seem like pretty positive things for the world, but maybe do it for things that not everyone will agree on. How do you respond to that critique that's out there about the growing role of private philanthropy?
Yeah, so again, there are a couple of complicated issues mixed in there. The main point that I would take, and speaking very much from the Gates Foundation again, is we believe the issues that we work on and are focused on and very much aligned with the Sustainable Development Goal, in particularly goals 1 through 6, which essentially are the ones most focused on the very poorest in education and healthcare and related areas, are actually non-partisan issues in whatever country you're in. Whether you're in India on different sides of the political debate, whether you're in the United Kingdom, whether you're in the United States, whether you're in South Africa or Brazil, that saving lives and providing opportunities for the very poorest are net publicly shared global values, and in fact they have been endorsed by every single country on the planet in the SDGs. And so if we can make sure that philanthropy is focused on those kind of issues and outcomes, then we don't think there's any kind of sort of deficit. It's actually all in support of already set and agreed on shared objectives. To the wider issue of the potential influence philanthropy can have around political and sort of policy debates in other areas, those I think are just very important national debates to have. They'll vary from country to country. They're part of a broader political discourse. It includes issues like taxation issues. Bill, Melinda, and Warren are all on the record as saying that they believe there should be a sort of much heavier inheritance tax in the United States. But that's not a philanthropy question. That's a governmental policy-related question that needs to be dealt with through the appropriate channels in Congress or elsewhere. And so I want to sort of make sure we keep the separation between the two.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And they do often end up getting conflated. I think another critique that's maybe on the other side of this very set of issues that I just want to get your take on is the idea that, well, maybe we all kind of agree on the goals, and there are certain goals that are nonpartisan, that are widely accepted, but isn't this era of growing philanthropy an easy opportunity to whitewash the sins of big corporates or billionaires who have made their money in nefarious ways or ways that actually hurt people? And they're now giving away some small portion of that, and it sort of improves their image and makes them look good. Whereas meanwhile, they're doing things that are actually undermining the public good. Do you think there's teeth to that argument? Does that argument ring at all true to you, or do you think it's really a misrepresentation of the actual situation?
So again, the primary focus from our end, we're a very outcome-oriented organization. The metrics are relatively lives saved. Is income increased? Do you have more kids graduating from high school ready for college in the United States and able to progress through college into the workforce? Those metrics matter, and so we're much more focused on what philanthropy does. Can the resources, way we want to encourage philanthropy, and then say, let's look at what the resources that are actually put into these objectives do. Are they effective? Are they meeting their goals? Even if they're not, because we expect a certain portion of them to fail, because one of philanthropy's benefits is it can take on riskier investments than the government or the private sector often can, and we should be, but let's have those metrics and debates. And so in one sense, we want to say, just what is the pool of money going into philanthropy? We hope it's increasing, because our goal is to try and make that increase in the United States and around the world. And then, is it being as high impact as possible? How do we do the return on investments? Again, there are separate, very important and healthy political discussions to have, but the kind of issues you're talking about are much more political about, how different billionaires may or may not have achieved their wealth is not a discussion for philanthropy. That's a discussion around, tax systems or structures or, law enforcement agencies or others who, want to take a look at that. And again, I worry that the two get conflated. And in fact, to your wider point, I do have a concern that, sometimes there may be some negative impact or perceptions about philanthropy as a term because it gets conflated with the sense of, how did, some people achieve their great wealth. And, our goal is let's try and, keep those issues separate. The aim and goal of philanthropy is much more about, can you get resources that otherwise would not be deployed against these very important outcomes, and in our world, really improving human lives, into these sectors and as impactfully as possible.
So maybe we can focus for a minute on some of those opportunities. I share some of this optimism that if we can get aligned on the goals, and the SDGs provide a perfect framework for this, there could be huge opportunities. And I wonder, trying to look ahead a bit, again, given your perch as Chief Strategy Officer at the world's largest foundation and all your communications with other growing foundations, where do you see this headed? Where do you see this kind of philanthropic sector in global development headed? How do you want it to operate maybe differently in the future than it does now? And what would be the big opportunities if we get that right?
Well, one opportunity is already underway. Can we work together, partner, share information on best practices, occasionally work together on issues that are linked to these outcomes? So you've mentioned the Bloomberg Foundation several times. We have a couple of big partnerships with them. For example, our biggest and longest standing is between the two of us. We are the largest funders of anti-tobacco advocacy in the developing world. And we've had that partnership now for well over a decade, and it's been very impactful in terms of trying to sort of slow down the pace of tobacco uptake, and whether it's in form of taxation and restrictions on advertising and other tools. And we also work with them and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative on an initiative called Resolve to Save Lives, which is focused on how you reduce so-called NCDs, non-communicable diseases like heart disease and high blood pressure and other sort of diseases of the rich world that are getting more common in poor countries, diabetes, together. And so I think more of those kinds of concrete partnerships, and making sure that those partnerships, because again, those two examples I just gave you on tobacco and health, are ones where we will work closely with the local government and local partners in any country we're working in. So it's not something that's just a standalone philanthropy flag that you come and plant in, say, Ghana. That this is all very aligned with the Ghanaian national efforts to put in place a proper anti-tobacco strategy, and we help provide and connect them to best practice from other countries that have been dealing with similar issues. And so to the extent we can sort of aggregate, and these partnerships will vary a little bit, sector by sector, depending on the interests of the principals involved. But that would be one big area where we see a lot of opportunity in the years ahead. And, my hope and expectation, you would see those kinds of partnerships really up to sort of 5 to 10x the size of what they currently are in the years ahead.
So collaboration and partnership are one big opportunity. I wonder, what about the way we measure impact and results? Historically, philanthropy has often had kind of a soft, cozy feel where it's easy to say, hey, look, we're doing good things, but not necessarily put out the data that you talked about earlier in the discussion and be data-driven. I know it's something the foundation has focused a lot on. Is there an opportunity here in this new era with much more growing philanthropy to get organized around common sets of impact metrics and put more emphasis on real-time delivery of data? And do you see that coming? Is that something you're pushing for?
Yeah, well, not only an opportunity, I think that is a revolution that is underway. It may, be in its relatively early stages, but if you take an area like family planning, which is one that is a major priority for the foundation, when we helped launch via Melinda Gates in 2012 a major new effort led by the UK government, a range of other governments, actually several dozen governments around the world, but it was came out of London, to reinvigorate family planning, to really focus on outcomes. Because there'd been a lot of focus around family planning as an issue, but when you started looking at indicators of access to family planning and multiple choices of contraceptive methods among women, we hadn't seen the kind of rates of improvement we hoped. And so this push was a big push, which we were very instrumental in saying, actually, we want to be much more focused on the outcomes. What are those products? Are they fully available? Do women have the choices? Are their local facilities fully stocked? And then we realized that traditional metrics, which are sort of health surveys that take place once every couple of years to ask people whether they have are not nearly real-time enough for us to actually understand whether we're moving the needle in key places. So we help launch, again with partners, a major effort to help provide much more real-time data using agents with cell phones able to go and sort of track shipments and report back. And we now have a much and more accurate data pool. Similarly, we have a big partnership with the UN Women, the main UN agency dealing with gender issues, to try and provide better, more thoughtful data at country level and at global level around the gender targets which are part of SDG 5. These are targets that involve things like better understanding access of women in the labor force, women in politics, issues about violence against women, child marriage, when those goals were launched, they're great targets. But when we took a look at them, we realized for the majority, we just simply didn't have data sources to track whether progress was being made or not. So a first step, and in this case, Melinda Gates helped the year after that launch a major gender data initiative, which central element is that partnership with UN Women. And now we're seeing significant progress. We're not nearly where we should be yet, but you can multiply this across different sectors. In agriculture, we supported an effort that provided, is now fully available to governments, Africa soil health mapping. If you're a Midwest farmer, you're able to use satellite mapping commercially to see the needs of your soil so you can optimize both your crops and your fertilizer and your irrigation use. We're able to take that, and that's a high type of data and outcomes, and actually provide that as a public good in Africa to help produce agriculture. So in sector after sector, I think that focus on information, data, accountability, measurement is a revolution underway. Philanthropy has played a key role in helping make that happen, but the success depends on whether governments and other partners then take and use that data to drive impact and accountability.
And I think that terminology revolution is right on, because it's not a small thing once we start focusing on impact metrics and actually publishing those transparently. I mean, if we think about a sector, as you said earlier, that is still dominated by government funding, there's some risk, isn't there, when we say, hey, these projects that we might have all felt good about actually are not successful, that money is not leading to the results we all want to see, especially when that's taxpayer money. And again, just not to harp on risks and concerns, but I am just curious, how do you think about how we get through this revolution around results in a way that still leads to public support for the important work of global health and development?
Yeah, and that's something we talk and think about all the time, because there is this tricky balance. But, back to where you started our questioning about why am I optimistic? The big picture long-term trends are all going in the right direction. And we feel really good about, understanding and the fact that we're actually getting better and smarter at the interventions we need to continue to accelerate improvements in sort of healthcare or income creation. But at the same time, we know there are many models of work we do. And in fact, this is something we've been, particularly in Bill's, been open about, some of the challenges, say, in the United States, where we've been working in the education sector, where we've had challenges working in areas like teacher effectiveness or curriculum reform, to then actually scale them up so that we see great project-level successes, but we see struggles or challenges in sort of scaling them up and making that impact stick. But that U.S. example is exactly the kind of thing that's the kind of risk that philanthropy can take. It's very difficult if you're a school district on your own or a government-funded agency to take a risky approach to testing out a different model of teacher training or something like that. But philanthropy can help do that experiment, measure it. It's our own metrics. We put in place evaluation mechanisms that are the very basis that shows you they weren't as successful as we hoped they were going to be. If we hadn't put those in place, we could easily have showcased individual successes without being honest about the big picture. But we think it's really important that we use that data in a meaningful way. So it's a tricky balance. But back to your wider point, that's actually somewhere where philanthropy can take a bigger burden, because we're way more comfortable, or we should be more comfortable, dealing with failure and taking those risks, and then allowing the ones that are successful to be taken and scaled up by governments so that they can report that success back to their citizens, because we want citizens to feel good about the services they're getting from their governments.
Yeah, philanthropy can take those risks, and maybe one of the risks that you've taken, you alluded to earlier, is the transparency side of this, right? I mean, once you put yourself out there to the world, you show all your projects, where you're spending your money, what's working, what's not working. I wonder what your message is to the philanthropies that are not doing that, because that is not the norm today. There are many philanthropies, including many of the new ones, that just don't publish much about what they do. Often their legal structure lets them avoid it, but even when they're organized as a nonprofit, they sort of do the minimum that they have to do. What is your thinking about that issue? Why, what's the case you make to others about how to be more transparent and why it matters?
Yeah. So we're just a big believer in transparency generally. And when we are not as good as we could or should be. Often it's just it's like giving money away. It's sometimes very difficult to be fully transparent because we're trying to find out, do we have the right materials uploaded on the right website that people can easily access? I mean, I know that sounds weird, but it's for our strategies. I say there will occasionally be key proprietary information, say about discussions we may be having with a private sector company on a proprietary technology, or which we aren't able or willing to be public about. But pretty well anything else we do, including any inputs we take before making decisions about where we spend, we're comfortable being pretty transparent about, both because we think that matters and is important. We actually make it a requirement when we fund research. We have a policy which we pioneered and many other philanthropies have now taken up called open access, which basically is a requirement if you're a researcher and you take Gates money for your research that any results of that research need to be made publicly available for common use to anybody. And that's actually quite controversial from researchers and others who've often wanted to keep control over their own databases and other things like that for a variety of reasons. And so we just strongly believe that transparency, both in terms of dialogue, who we talk to, how we talk about things, and the way in which we model our own work is important for impact. And we're very comfortable sort of saying that to other philanthropic partners and trying to show them our models. And you're right, there are different models, but we would have a strong bias and hope that many of those other entities you talk about do end up becoming more public, because we just think that's healthier and it's likely to be more impactful in the long run.
Uploaded on the right website, and we tackle this every day at Devex, and it is amazing in our sector, working on some of the most important issues in the world, how often basic information is hard to find. It's buried. It's sitting in PDFs or in data that's very old is published. It's a big issue in our space. If we want to get to more of a kind of a market orientation around results, it does matter.
No, and it's not just about, you're talking about transparency when it comes to the public, but actually, one of the challenges I found as in my chief strategy officer role is often I'll find teams that have been commissioning the same kind of work or research about, the best way to find intermediaries to help get, R&D products into the public domain, where we've already done that 3 times before in other parts of the foundation. And all we need to do is pool our own thinking, but those people haven't connected. And so one of the roles I made is a very light touch but a high impact, as I just connect people across different strategies who are dealing with similar problems, and they're able to share those knowledge categories which no one can find looking in our intranet. So, I think that's a problem that most organizations share, but I think it's particularly detrimental in a sector like ours, and so very important to try and tackle it.
Yeah, there's the classic, story, the example that's always given of people showing up in a village to do some kind of aid project and finding out there are already 3 other organizations doing the same thing. And it is an issue across our sector, and the results revolution you alluded to, a big reason for it would be to try to get at that, and to try to have less duplication and more focus on the groups and the initiatives that work getting the attention and the funding. I wonder as we kind of wrap this, you have alluded a few times to kind of what kind of work you do, but I'm not sure everyone understands what advocacy and policy work really is in the context of philanthropy. It isn't necessarily the way people think of a traditional philanthropy, which writes checks as grants to initiatives or organizations it supports. You've got a very different mindset when you're looking at the big issues like polio or malaria that you mentioned before. Maybe just take us through, what is a day in the life of Mark Suzman like? What are you actually doing all day when you're doing policy and advocacy work in this role?
Well, I'll use a couple of live examples, but essentially what the role of our advocacy division, and as I alluded to earlier, we didn't have an advocacy division early in the life of the foundation. When Bill and Melinda launched the foundation, they didn't think there was going to be any need for advocacy or their voice. We thought would be a sort of much more focused on these what we call public good creation, and the world would take care of making sure it got to those who needed them. And over time, they've realized actually we do need to actively build partnerships and commitments with others, and that their own voice can be very powerful in the areas we work in, and that we can play a role convening and bringing together partners who otherwise might not have been are brought together around the table. And so essentially my advocacy vision is how do you take the issues we work on and widen the pool and the groups of individuals, whether it's governments, whether it's philanthropists, whether it's other partners who are aligned, who are working together, who are driving towards that. So a concrete example that we've been working on for most of this year, and we have the G7 summit about to happen in France, in Biarritz, hosted by President Macron, is Melinda Gates has been working on an effort through the G7 finance ministers to launch a major program around expanding financial inclusion for women in Africa. And so that's a program that our Financial Services for the Poor team, already have a set of investments that we think using digital technology, there's some amazing opportunities to expand access to bank accounts, other financial services, credits, loans, insurance in Africa. And we've turned it into, in this case, and this is the role of my division, is how do we work through the big governments of the G7? How do we work through the African Development Bank, which is actually a major implementing partner for this? How do we work with some of the countries where the work will happen? So my group is, how do you pool all those together? How do you engage with the processes? How do we talk with the media around it to get people engaged and excited? And so it happens to be the year of France hosting things. Actually, we will have 2 years of France hosting things, because a little later we have President Macron also hosting the replenishment of the Global Fund to fight AIDS, TB, and malaria, which will be in Lyon later this year. And that's an incredibly important moment. That is one of those big multilateral partnerships which, when you ask, are there areas of activity that could take up large pools of money and spend it well really quickly right now? That's one. It saves literally millions of lives by keeping HIV-positive people alive on antiretrovirals, setting bed nets, TB treatments. And so we have undertaken, and we do it again in partnership with the French and with the World Health Organization and with a full range of other partners, engaging almost government by government. What commitment can you make? Here's why. We'll give you the evidence about why this is the most impactful investment that probably your government has ever made in terms of lives saved, and why you should keep making it. And so my role and my team's role is really providing the data and information, pulling those actors together, trying to sort of drive towards a common set of shared outcomes. And we'll do that in all of the sectors we work on.
And I'm sure it can be exhilarating some days. It can probably be frustrating others. What is it like kind of looking out at the actual challenges that you're trying to face? Sometimes it must feel like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah, well, just take today's United States is a challenging environment. I mean, we, for the first part of the foundation's life, where we went through first the first Bush administration and then the Obama administration, for 16 years, we basically were very strongly aligned, working across party lines with both governments who did support major efforts in the space where we focus on. President Bush famously launched both PEPFAR and the initial U.S. funding for the Global Fund that I just talked about. President Obama launched the Feed the Future initiative in agriculture. And the Trump administration, has not been as supportive. Its budget submissions each year have actually proposed deep cuts in these programs. And so we have, in this case, we provide information and data both with the administration, who we keep engaging with, and with Congress, about why it's really important that the United States doesn't backtrack from these issues. But, it's definitely our engagement in Washington, D.C. has been a lot more defensive, and, it's been a little depressing in that sense that we've had to be defensive on issues that we think are such clear global public goods and where U.S. leadership has been so impactful in the past. But back to where you started, in the big picture, we remain highly optimistic that this is the trajectory we're going to go in. And my job in helping bring together the partners and people to help drive that forward, hopefully against the highest impact interventions, back to your R&I and data, that's what keeps me going every day.
Well, thank you for taking some time to think this through. I mean, it's a very immediate one, but this growing role of private philanthropy, as you talked about, the growing role of the foundation itself, that creates huge opportunities, but it's a key set of issues that need a lot of attention and discussion and debate, and that's something we're excited to continue to do at Devex. So thanks for taking some time to discuss it with us today.
Great. Thank you, Raj, and look forward to continuing the conversation.